Do you know what legacy means?
It's what you pass down to your children and your children's children. It's what remains of you when you're gone.
Hey, everybody. This is a Team Green centric discussion on what just took place in episode 4 of House of the Dragon. This is House of the Empire, and I'm Zach here with Sean. Excited to break it all down with you. Obviously, we're going to have to hit the highlights because this was a jam packed episode full of intrinsic discussions and extremely large scale battle sequences, dude. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I dare say this episode had a little bit of everything, especially when it comes to character development and set pieces for what's going to take place on Team Green.
Yeah, going into the episode, obviously a lot of people got to see this episode early in terms of critics and stuff, and there's a lot of comparisons to like Battle of the Bastards, which I don't think is accurate at all. I don't think that's where this is. It feels like a bunch of other episodes to an extent. That's not one that came to mind for me, but I like the way you put it. It literally has a little bit of everything, which is great. And hey, Alan Taylor back to do this episode. Did my favorite episode ever, Game of Thrones, so can't complain with that.
Yeah, he directed season 7's Beyond the Wall. He also was a part of season 1, the episode that took Ned Stark's head off, which was probably the episode that got me hooked on Game of Thrones as a whole. And so he definitely brought the experience and brought the thunder and did a hell of a job with this episode. It's so fascinating to see what Alicent has become as the Queen Mother of King's Landing after her conversation with Rhaenyra in the previous episode. A couple of our talking points in this video are going to be just about Alicent, but if you want a full-blown discussion, then be sure to follow the links in the description to be able to listen to our podcast. We're going to have almost a scene-by-scene description of the entire episode, talking about Alicent, Aemond, Aegon, just all the big players, Cole. We're gonna touch on all of it in the podcast, so be sure to go and follow the links in the description for that. But Alicent, I think, may have been one of the MVPs of this whole episode. Definitely one of the MVPs for Team Green, because she is a person of perspective after that conversation with Rhaenyra, I feel like. And she's now starting to look for perspective from some of the other people on the small council, from her own son, trying to impart some perspective onto him at least. And it's really interesting to see that she is, number one, suffering the consequences of her quote unquote sin with Kristen Cole having to ask for kind of a plan B type of tea. But then she also has a conversation with Larys, and like I said, she has a conversation with Aegon. She is really, really looking to like establish her paradigms and center herself, it feels like, in this episode. And it starts with that conversation with Grandmaster Orwell that he was able to dodge and deflect pretty well, I feel like. But the fact that she's even asking these questions of the council members, I think is pretty ballsy.
The first thing that comes to mind, man, and Jade and I talked about this during our watch through the episode. It's like, oh, Alicent is literally opening the Cersei playbook. Like Olivia Cook just absolutely harnessing Cersei in this, in my opinion. Like it felt like right out of Game of Thrones. It was a captivating scene. And this show, this is, you and I have talked about it with Game of Thrones, where you can go back and you can rewatch it 2, 3, 4 times because you pick up on things that maybe you missed during the first watch through. Maybe you looked down at your phone. Maybe you just had your attention grabbed from you for a split second. And the one thing that got it to me, or stood out for me anyways, was, yeah, he didn't really answer the question verbally, but he absolutely answered the question with his silence at the beginning. And the answer was, no, he doesn't think Viserys changed his mind.
Didn't think he changed his mind. Didn't think that Aegon should be on the throne. And that hesitation, the non-speaking can speak as loud as actual words. And that was very Thrones in nature, for sure. But But it's interesting that she didn't really get rid of the tea or anything, because even after that conversation, Laris kind of walks in and kind of talks to her about why she's studying the histories and why she's trying to gain this perspective that her late husband had, and how she's been doing. And she tries to shrug it off as like, oh, I've been mourning my husband and now we're going off to war just a couple of weeks later. But Laris sees the teacup, and I think I'm pretty sure he takes a mental note of it, and it's another scene in that chamber of witty repartee between a couple of important players for Team Green, trying to figure out where each of them stands as Harrenhal is being taken, as the dragons are about to become bigger players, as they try to figure out Aegon's role as quote unquote king, but also as a potential puppet. That there's a lot at play in that conversation with Orwell, but then also with Laris as well.
No, absolutely. And you know what? The leaving the tea for me was definitely a sign of weakness from Allison. Not in terms of like she's a weak person, but she's got so much going on right now. And that conversation with Rhaenyra has rocked her to her core, to
Mm-hmm.
a point where now she's basically trying to talk to Viserys from beyond the grave.
Yeah, that's essentially what she's doing. She's trying to see what kind of gleanings she can gain from ancient history texts, the things that he would pore over for years. And she's kind of lamenting the fact that there isn't peace anymore. And that's fascinating to see that, you know, she wanted peace, but she didn't think that her desire for it would be this strong, I feel like. And now I feel like she's wishing that she could have negotiated for peace when she had the chance, because now that all of these different types of people are in power, that moment has passed. And with this, we've mentioned this before, I think on last week's episode, without her dad, there really isn't a voice of reason on this council anymore. And there isn't anybody that's going to rein these people in. And we kind of see the consequences of that in the final fight sequence. So the lack of Otto Hightower again strikes in this episode, because there's a lot of conniving and there's a lot of indulgences being fed in the last third of this episode, I feel like.
No, I think you hit the point spot on, man. The train is off the tracks, if you will, and there's no getting it back on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what really derailed Aegon, and this is the last Alicent conversation we're going to touch on before we go to that scene, that final 15, 20 minutes, as it were. The last conversation that she has is with her own son, with Aegon, after he gets bored of the council not listening to him or not being able to provide input. And she basically chews him out, saying, "You have no idea the depths that we went to put you on the throne. You have no idea the sacrifices that were made on your behalf. You don't know." And honestly, it feels like a little bit of gaslighting, but we're not going to go down that rabbit hole just that much. But she's like, "I was really hoping that you would at least be wise enough to learn from the wisdom of other people on your council. And instead, you're doing pretty much the opposite of that." And almost, no sooner did she leave the chambers and it seemed like he had this resolve that he was going to go and do something. And what he did was just extremely impulsive and immature.
Very much so, much like the Kingsguard, right? So,
Right.
um, it's devastating to see a conversation like that between mother and son, and obviously the one that hits Aegon the most is we'd be lucky if you were half the king your father was. It's like, oh,
Right.
everybody's just starting to realize, yeah, that Viserys guy maybe wasn't as bad of a king as we originally thought.
I kind of miss him, is what they're starting to realize. And that's another interesting dynamic, because in season one, they basically couldn't wait to get rid of him. And now they kind of want him back, and they can't. So that's unfortunate. But that impulsive decision that we talk about is a big one for Team Green, because uh, Cole and Aemond basically planned an ambush at this very non-important strategic site And next thing you know, Rook's Rest becomes one of the biggest uh, fight sequences in the entire show, and it may be one of the biggest, most important battles, period, because Aegon joins the fight. We eventually, find his dragon, but we don't really see all that much of his body. And the trap basically works because they're able to signal for Vhagar, and Vhagar and Aemon deal a pretty crushing blow to the Black's cause in this final fight.
Yeah, this was they had a plan. It didn't go off the way they had intended it to, thanks to King Aegon. Aemond and Cole had their little plan set, and to Cole's displeasure, I don't think he understood that Aemond had his own plan. Once again, we've talked about on a bunch of our content how it seems like people at both tables are just not on the same page, and in this case, the three-headed monster that's Aemond, Aegon, and Cole, they're not even on the same page. And just the reaction from Cole when Aegon comes in, and like you can tell it's genuine. It's like, oh, what the hell? This isn't going as planned. It was just so wonderfully shot, man. By the way, masterclass in cinematography in this episode.
Oh, 100%. We've talked about the not on the same page, chaotic nature of these types of episodes from a dialogue perspective. But I really feel like the fight in this episode displayed the chaotic fighting styles that are going to be taking place in this show, because the only order that really took place was at the peak of Rook's Rest at the very beginning of the episode, when they were firing off consecutive volleys of arrows. They were like, loose, new row, loose, new row. There was a little bit of organization there. But if you take a look at the carnage that takes place in the aftermath of this battle, the burn marks and the people that are scorched, and the trees that have felled, and the fires that are still going, it is nothing like what we saw in season 7 of Game of Thrones when Daenerys finally shows up and lays waste to the Lannisters. It's one big line of pyrotechnics that's kind of like this big money shot. But in this episode, there's a lot of chaos to the flames, which is, in my opinion, symbolic to the disorganized nature of their fighting styles. Rather than something that is like clean trajectory, it's all over the place. And that's very evident in the approach that each member of Team Green has. Aegon's coming in to try to prove himself. Cole is still fighting for his king loyally, like he should. Aemon, like you said, has his own objectives. I feel like for the most part, all three of them kind of achieve their goals more or less. But the carnage and the chaos that ensues leaves just so much for Team Green to figure out. I still think Team Green wins this episode just because of what happens to Meleys and Rhaenys, but it's gonna come at a price, I feel like, in the next couple of episodes.
Yeah, chaos is a great way of putting it. I think the way that they did the battle really showed the 3 different directions, arguably 4 different directions the battle is being pulled in by Team Green. You have the Hightower's direction, you have Cole's direction, and the 2 Dragon Riders. And it is sort of just complete chaos, and they did a really good job of conveying that on screen. For our Team Black POV of this battle, tune into our Team Black review. But for this one, like, I feel like Aemond was pretty content with letting Meleys and Rhaenys go, not once, but twice. And to me, that really showed you what his intent was. And if it wasn't for Cole there at the end, man, with his Jaime Lannister moment, getting up sort of in shock, like the Money Train episode you were referring to earlier, if he doesn't get there, I think that Aemon probably finishes the job. I think Aegon's alive. I had a chance to see a couple stills from it. I just want your thoughts on it. I think there's a parallel here between Aegon and Viserys. Viserys at the end is falling apart. His body's not there. People aren't really listening to him. They're going about, going behind him, doing their own thing. And all of a sudden, the guy that Aegon least wants to be like is probably the guy in some ways he's now most like.
I think I need just a little bit more in order to fully agree with that comparison. I think they are trying to create some parallels. I won't deny that. But I think what they're really trying to show is that while Team Green may have a lot of strength and they may have a lot of men going to their cause, I think the man that they're trying to rally behind is not worthy. And so I think it's about him trying to claim his worthiness. And if he's still alive in the next episode, yeah, he's going to be falling apart. He's going to be disheveled. But I don't think his resolve is going to be broken. I think he's still going to try to get back out there and continue to try to prove himself. I think right now his pride is wounded more than his body will be. But that's just me. So yeah, those are some of our thoughts on Team Green. A reminder to check out our podcast to be able to hear our full thoughts on this season 2, episode 4 discussion of House of the Dragon. And then we've got a Team Green discussion, Team Black discussion. Team Green discussion is done for now. Can we cut that? I'm gonna do the outro again. So yeah, those are some of our thoughts surrounding Team Green here on House of the Empire, talking season 2, episode 4 specifically. A reminder to go tune into our podcast to be able to hear all of our thoughts on this jam-packed episode. And then be sure to take a look at our Team Black discussion that is right here on the YouTube channel. But for Sean, I'm Zach, thanking you for tuning into this episode, and we hope to see you again next time. But until then, we'll see you when the Empire returns.
Do you know what legacy means?
It's what you pass down to your children and your children's children. It's what remains of you when you're gone.